Channel here, become a member over at Subscribestar. Thanks to everyone who has, especially a Vegan and Frog. So Purple Tinker, Jessica Blank versus Kara Lynn, and Limited Run Games versus the ever so tiresome cancel culture. You know, aren't you getting tired? I think to be fair, people are getting tired of this kind of stuff. So this is where it started. So what happened? The victim of a toxic SJW Brony, what a statement that is, who got fired from Limited Run Games, released a statement today. This is where it started with Jessica Blank, Purple Tinker, I guess is the name of the character, a Brony who has a long Kiwi Farms collected history across various forums about their hatred for white people and Christians. And they have a long history of being a weirdo at Brony cons, conventions for Bronies, which, what's the bar on that if you're a weirdo at Brony? No offense to the Bronies. I'm sure they're mostly just having a good time. The Kiwi Farms article on them is a fascinating read. It turns out they have a long internet history of being weird and against Christians, prayer in general, and against white people, which is kind of a weird flex. So this is the article from Carolyn on Twitlonger, which seems to me like, isn't that just Substack? In case, I have got a Substack too. Eventually I'm going to start posting on there. And a Locals. In case you don't know what a Brony is, My Little Pony was a kid's toy. A comic book started in 1981. The cartoon started in 1981 about anthropomorphic horses that went on adventures. It was great for what it was. It was just a silly kids thing, but for some reason, some adults got really into it. Except I don't think they got into it in the 80s and 90s as adults. I think that happened later, and they started collecting the toys and the comics. And the toys, like, keep in mind, this is just the cheapest garbage made out of China, just a plastic, stylized horse model. And the comics, and then they went to conventions where they dress up in costumes, and then there's a cosplay, and then there's an issue about some of the stuff they were doing was adult stuff that wasn't appropriate for the younger audience that the cartoon was intended for, which is probably like a 6-year-old girl audience, where something like, Transformers and G.I. Joe would be an older male audience, and then Smurfs would be a step down from that, maybe a little bit younger audience, but also for both sexes. And then something like Little Ponies was probably skewed more so for females, probably, and less warfare based, I think. But it's all based on a cartoon designed to sell toys. Like, that's all the stuff from the 80s and 90s was all 25-minute advertisements, essentially. But I suppose that G.I. Joe Transformers were boys' toys based on warfare, and Smurfs was based on the evil witch Gargamel and his familiar. Little Pony was less conflict-based and more cute stuff about learning lessons. If I had to guess, I'd say roughly kind of like a Hobbit, Lord of the Rings ripoff, but for kids, based on village life and parables through the ages, that kind of stuff for a younger audience. And I read some of the comics a year ago when I did an article for something else about it. They were good. They were well-written comics, but you read them and go, oh, this is, pretty decent story. Kind of, I can see where it's based on the Hobbits or something like that. But it's not something you would read and think, oh yeah, this is going to inspire a movement of adult men to get behind. It's like, it's not that good. Like, I can understand a comic con, a convention con, a cosplay con for like cartoons, all the days back to Steamboat Willie and the Flintstones, and then up to the modern through the 80s was probably the peak. But it's like it's weird that there's enough energy for like a convention just for one comic. That not all of them, it's just these little anthropomorphic horses. You look at the cartoon, you're like, I don't see how this is inspiring a movement. But friendship is magic, I guess. And for whatever reason, people really liked the cartoon, which I have to admit I have not seen the cartoon, but I did read the comics. Anyway, so Purple Tinker, aka Jessica Blank, was a weirdo, even for the Brony crowd. They were obsessed with the hatred of the Germans in the 1930s, Christians, and then their hatred of European people in general. They're like, even SJWs do this weird thing where they're always calling each other out to try to correct each other's problematic behavior, and then they all have to kind of pretend like, oh, thank you for correcting me, but it's the meme of the guys wearing the smiling mask, but underneath he's secretly seething with this passive-aggressive SJW, just endless bickering back and forth about their problematic behavior. It's like, well, let me allow you to, and like they have to pretend to be polite, and let me correct you on your problematic behavior. And they're going back and forth about, well, that's very, it's like, they're just seething inside. They're just going back and forth. It's like, you guys don't have friends, because friends are going to drop, the most offensive jokes on earth. And it's like, that's kind of a test of, like, are you surrounded by a bunch of pussies or not? And with SJWs, like, it's got to be, if you saw that socialist, it's a video on YouTube, it's like a socialist meeting, and it had to be 20% of the meeting was taking up with non-substantive issues, like things that weren't probative and relevant to the reason they were there, to zealously advocate for whatever they were advocating for. They were talking about their pronouns and their phobias and their privileges and all this kind of like imaginary made up stuff. And that was a good 20% of the meeting was wasted in that. And you look at these people like, you can't accomplish anything if you have to start with a preamble about your ethnicity and your privilege, or how you're marginalized and oppressed, Irish person of whatever. It's like that takes up a good chunk of your meeting that you just don't have time to do that. But they do it anyway. It's bizarre. You can see it on YouTube. Anyway, so this person is a weirdo even for bronies. They're like, they out SJW the other SJWs. And that gets really tiresome for a while, where even the other SJWs are trying to find a reason. Like, we're paying the ass SJWs, but there's a limit. Like, we still have to get stuff done, and you still want to go to a convention and have fun and not have this person who just turns up the weirdness. So now the way they've developed this Marxist dialectic is, first they build these shields, and this all happened in the past 100 years with Bernstein, and who changed his name to Trotsky or vice versa or something, who started getting this ball rolling with the Frankfurt School and its cultural Marxism, to get people to introduce these ideas to people, to get them to have it interwebbed in part of their network. So they just get these istophobic words out in the public and pushed via Bolshevik media and control of the government schools, and more importantly the lower school boards. Like if you ever heard Weingarten speak, to the student union president, you listen to her and you're hearing a cultural Bolshevik, an absolute sociopath who's like, their philosophy is they need to teach kids, and parents should not have any rights, because they know that if you can brainwash the kids, it's like you can brainwash the kids mostly. But I will say, like, even you can be subject to all the brainwashing in the world, and then you hit like senior year in high school, and like other people start to red pill you, and it's like it can kind of wash off pretty quickly, because you look at it and it's like the things they're saying are so absurd. They're describing, like, they're trying to describe situations that you just know don't happen in the real world. And as soon as you hit like 17, 18, you start looking around, you're like, yeah, the things you're saying are not in accord with reality. But it's weird for people to kind of get it in their head, like there's a whole collection of people who will lie to you right to your face. And it's like humans don't want to accept that, because I know we have this kind of caveman mentality where you need to be able to trust other people. Anyway, so they raise these shields where if you, they create these words, and like none of those istophobic words are real. They're control terms for the cattle, fear-based compliance. So if you criticize them in any way, they simply raise these istophobic shields, and which, the media is constantly supporting. It's like everything that's happened in the past 3 or 4 years only happened because the media wanted it to happen, including the 2020 Summer of Love. If the media had handled that differently, none of that would have happened. The media is directly responsible for all that. Be careful, be careful, be careful. So if you criticize people anyway, they raise this istophobic shields, don't say anything in the comments, and rally a toxic SJW hate mob on Twitter and go after people to destroy them, but it's all over nothing. If you don't want men in the ladies' shower, then they'll track you down and try to destroy your life. Some mothers were upset about naked men around their daughters, and they did a protest. I think this was in San Diego. These BLT activists showed up, and these Antifa types. So these Antifa types stabbed 2 other Antifa at a protest where mothers were protesting. Peaceful mothers were assembled. Antifa was so outraged, they stabbed each other. Yeah, it's just as crazy as it sounds, and like that kind of stuff actually happens fairly often with these people. And the funny thing is, like this guy, he's naked around a bunch of kids, and the media immediately comes out to defend this guy, and then it comes out that he's got a history, he's got a criminal history of doing bad things. And then you look at the media like, so you're going to retract that article? You're going to issue a follow-up, or just going to kind of hope that it gets memory hold? And you know what happens. I mean, the media does this kind of stuff all the freaking time, and they just never get called on it. Anyway, so enter limited run games, and an employee who says something like that, and maybe something like, maybe kids should not be around naked men. That's what a reasonably prudent person would say. Yeah, kids, can you just leave kids alone? And to these cultural Bolsheviks, no, they have to get kids, from 5 to 15. That's like the peak brainwashing time period, which is why homeschooling or small base national schools is so important. Like if you had a generation of homeschool people or small neighborhood schools that were just didn't teach this kind of stuff, this Bolshevism, it would end it in like 10 years. Because that's how powerful the government school propaganda is. And to be fair, even some of the private schools have this kind of nonsense. Catholic schools, probably not so much, at least not back in my day. It was, we didn't, like, it was a completely different education environment. Anyway, so this woman is obviously of European descent and probably Christian, and Jessica Blank really hates that. So they started tweeting at the game company and got her fired. And all the company has to do is ignore these people and it all disappears. That's how easy it is. Because otherwise, if you allow yourself and company to be controlled by a handful of SJW activists, you're telling your employees that you don't value them and you'll fire them at the drop of a hat. You don't run your company by yourself, that a toxic Twitter activist can actually has the final veto for your company. What are all the other employees supposed to feel about their relationship with the company? They know that their boss won't go to bat for them. At the slightest pressure, they'll get destroyed, which is why it's very important to bring attention to limited run games so their potential customers know what kind of people they are. Then it started coming out that Jessica Blank was a deeply disturbed person who seemed to be defending underage people doing things that they could not legally consent to doing. And the more people looked at Blank, they realized that it was just completely nuts. And then you looked at limited run games and that this was, this one disturbing and disturbed person was able to get somebody fired over an old tweet. What a chilling effect on free speech will this have when people learn that if you criticize these sacred cows and their ideas, they'll stalk you down, hunt you, and get you fired. So these toxic left-wing ideas don't get criticism, and they get normalized, and the window keeps moving further and further to the left because people are afraid to speak out against it. Otherwise, they'll just get fired. Obviously, the simple solution is just to pass a law protecting people from being discriminated against for opinions online. You should not be fired or banned from banks, payment processors, rental services, any services. It would be the logical next step to protect people from these mentally ill, toxic SJW Bolsheviks stalking people online. Perhaps we need special protection for Christians and European people because they're the ones at risk right now. Hashtag no lives can matter until white lives matter. So the victim released a statement about limited run games, but really the situation is bigger than these individuals. And until we get laws protecting us, it shows the importance of forming in-groups and an alternative community, alternative marketplace, because individuals don't have power, groups have power. If they attack you as a group, then it would make sense to form groups to protect your interests. Do you really want to continue to live in this cancel culture society where mentally ill, toxic globalists are the only ones with any power? They're just going to continue to take more and more power until we start to push in the other direction. These are the people who hold all the power in society, because all you need is to be part of this imaginary, marginalized and oppressed and disenfranchised and systemic and systematic group. And it's like, is it real? No. It's real if you, it's witchcraft or demonology. It's real if you pretend it's real, if the outcome is real. But these people all have, like these people before smartphones and social media networks, they wouldn't be listened to. They'd be in the neighborhood walking around, mostly harmless, but it would be it. They wouldn't have this disproportionate influence where they can attack someone on social media because they created this hierarchy, and then they created this hierarchy that magically they're at the top of, right? And it gives them power over everyone else on social media, to the point where they can tweet at a company, get someone fired, get an angry mob to chase this woman down, and nothing happens to them. Like no angry mob goes after this person, tracks them around to get them fired. Nothing happens to this person. They just keep going, like tossing grenades in society. And social media facilitates it, and the companies also facilitate it, and there's no defense against this kind of person, this fomenter of discord, these people who grow the tall grass. There's no system in place. Like, yeah, it would seem to be a really easy thing to pass a law to protect people from being fired from these kind of people online. For you had a political opinion online, you had an opinion online, it didn't affect your workplace environment, and you're getting stalked and harassed by a toxic SJW. It's like, well, why aren't there protections in place for people? It's like, I don't know. You have to go ask those 535 people who allegedly are representing us. It seems like they're really busy voting themselves raises or money to foreign countries that passes through many sticky fingers. Like, yeah, it'd be cool if you guys would actually do something about the people you're allegedly representing. It's like, well, they're not worth $100 million because they're representing you. Like, they're not doing anything about this. It's like, but we pay you to represent us. And like, it seems like it's an important issue that's been going on for at least 10, 15 years with the rise of social media and smartphones. It's weird that nobody's doing anything about it. Like, this appears to be an issue. How come nobody in Congress is talking about it? I don't know. That's a good question. You have to ask these people. Like, do we really want a society where we're ruled by these type of people? Because that's the way it is now. It's like this person had the power to call a company and get someone fired. And like now people are kind of softly boycotting the company, or at least limited run games, bringing attention to it and say, hey, we don't really like what you're doing. We're not going to buy your stuff. And so it's costing the company money. It's like, well, they didn't have to fire the person either, but they didn't have to do any of this. All they had to do was ignore these people, and all the other companies, all you have to do is start ignoring these people. Or like Twitter, social media could have a policy that says, okay, we're not gonna allow like endless harassment of a person and like bringing up old tweets. It's like, you said something on social media, it's not important, but you're gonna use it to get somebody fired and maybe even take down a company over nothing, over someone who said something, like naked men shouldn't be around kids. Like, that's a reasonable thing to say. It's like the company should have limited run games. Should have just ignored it. It's like, yeah, we don't deal with harassment campaigns on social media. It's like, yeah, there'd be a couple angry people on social media, but some people would boycott your game because of that, but not many, to be fair. And it's like, what would happen is like, well, if companies stopped paying attention to these people, this stuff would end. They would just be yelling into a void. And like, where do you think society goes where you have these angry mobs? Well, it has a chilling effect on free speech. And the free speech is only right-wing people. Like, the right wing can't get these left-wing people fired. I mean, the point of it is so bad now, where it's like, if you're, I don't know if right-wing is the right thing, but if you're a liberal libertarian, a free speecher, don't want to be part of these cancel mobs. So the best thing you can do is like form some kind of alternative communities, alternative marketplaces, because we don't want to be ruled by these people, which is, I mean, it's a situation, like, these people have an amazing amount of power on social media. They got one tweet, it got like 3,000 likes, calling somebody istophobic, and then that person's fired. And now all this attention's, like, the company's probably dealing with the loss of, I don't know how big the company is, probably thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars. But, companies are not flushing cash anyway. So if they're losing customers, will the company be around a year from now? I don't know. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe. See you guys on the next episode.